Okay, the first thing you need to do is start by making the pastry. I am making 200 grams of pastry here, so I'm using 200 grams of plain flour and I am using 100 grams of butter. The recipe you are following may well have different quantities of flour and butter. I'm making this for 2 recipes. As long as you remember that the rule of thumb is that it's half the amount of fat to the amount of flour in a recipe. I cut the butter up into quite small pieces and I'm now rubbing it in between my fingertips, which are the coolest part of my hands, until they form breadcrumbs. When I think I've got rid of all of the lumps, if I shake the bowl ever so gently, then the lumps will rise to the surface, so you can see easily whether or not the breadcrumbs are formed. Try and rub gently like that across your fingertips. Try not to squeeze it, because what you don't want to do is melt the butter. You need to keep the butter solid, but what we're trying to do is coat the flour with butter in order to prevent the gluten strands from being able to develop, because what we're aiming for with pastry is a soft, crumbly texture. This is exactly the opposite to when you're making bread. Once you've got your butter rubbed into your flour and it looks like this, like fine breadcrumbs, you're ready to add the water. As a rule of thumb, you add 1 teaspoon of water for every 25 grams of flour, so in theory I need 8 teaspoons of water for this amount of pastry, but I'm not going to add it all at once. If I add all the water at once and there's too much, then I can't take it away. I'm using measuring spoons to make sure I get exactly a teaspoon. If you're using measuring spoons, that is not a teaspoon. You need to get it right up to the top, and I'm going to start, I think, by adding 6. I can always add more water if I need to. And then I'm going to use a knife to cut through the pastry and just mix that water in. I'm going to try and handle and squeeze this pastry as little as possible during this process. If I squeeze it, it will become leathery and it won't be the desired pastry. Okay, I've got all of that water mixed in, so I'm going to have a very little feel, and what I'm feeling for here is to see if I gently pulled it together, it would stick together, and there's no way that would. I am actually going to add 2 more teaspoons of water. You're aiming for something very soft but not crumbly. The lighter touch you are with this, the better it will be. That's good. So I'm very gently pulling it together. I am not squeezing it hard or kneading it. I'm just pulling it together so that it holds in one ball. It should clean the bowl, but it shouldn't be sticky. That's really good. For treacle tart, I'm using a glass Pyrex plate. This is oven proof. Whatever you use needs to be oven proof, preferably a plate, but if you don't have a plate, any very shallow oven proof dish would work. So I don't want to roll all of this out at once. I'm going to roll out 2/3 of this pastry. So I'm going to put a little bit of flour on my surface and a little bit of flour on my rolling pin. And I need to roll this out big enough to be able to cover the plate. It's important to be gentle when you roll. So I'm rolling in one direction at a time, and I'm keeping the pastry moving around the board as I roll it. When your pastry gets too big to handle in one go, if you roll it around the rolling pin, you can then lift it, and that helps you to move it around the board. just about do it. Okay. And the bit that came off here, you can easily just a little bit of water on the edge. You can stick that back on. And we're going to stick that in the fridge and chill that until we're ready to use it further. Instead of the pastry that we had, we're now going to roll that out into strips, because these strips will form the lattice work on the treacle tart. And we need to try and get these as long as the widest bit of the plate. So what we now need to do is, if we use a sharp knife, I'm going to cut these into strips. It doesn't really matter how long, if they're different lengths, as long as they're all the same width. To make the filling, you need half the zest of a lemon. So I'm using these small holes on the grater, and I'm grating it ever so lightly so that I'm aiming for a very smooth surface once I've zested it. I'm not aiming for ridges. If you can see ridges where you've been grating it, then you've been too heavy-handed with the grater, and you will have grated pith into the lemon as well, and we don't want pith because that's bitter. And once I've got the zest of the lemon, I'm then going to juice it. So I'm just going to get all of those mixed out of the grater. I'm then going to cut it in half. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to put 200 grams of golden syrup into a pan. I don't quite think I've got enough. These squeezy bottles are much easier than tins. So with the tins, you have to just make sure that you twizzle the spoon so you don't end up with golden syrup everywhere. I'm going to stop there because that's showing 185 grams, but I'm quite confident there's about another 15 grams still on that spoon, so I'm going to just put the spoon in like that. And we're then going to add lemon zest. We're going to add 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. That's perfect. And we're going to add a pinch of ground ginger. I'm just going to measure it actually because I've got 1/8 of a spoon measure, and I think that's probably about a pinch. And then I'm going to put that on the heat, not for very long. All I'm aiming for is to make the syrup just a little bit runnier so that I can mix some breadcrumbs into it. Normally you would always use a wooden spoon when heating things up, but actually this is on the heat for such a short amount of time. The spoon you use to measure out your syrup is absolutely fine, and the heat helps all of that syrup come off the spoon. And that is enough. You can see it's just running there. And then I'm going to add to that 100 grams of breadcrumbs. All I did was I just put some bread into the food processor and just gave it a good whiz. All just mixed together, and that makes the treacle tart filling. Perfect. Okay, so we're ready to assemble the treacle tart now. My chilled pastry. I'm going to put the filling middle. Just get that around to the edges. And I've also cracked an egg into a little ramekin dish, and I've beaten it with a fork. I'm now going to paint egg around the edge. And that's going to act as a glue. And so I now need to put my strips in place. I haven't got a huge number here, I've only got 8. So it's going to be quite an open lattice. One like that. And I'm going to put another like that. And then I'm going to put a second one over there, and if you can see how that one goes over and then under, and then I'm going to fold this back, and then I'm going to put a third one like that, and then I'm going to fold this back over, and then I'm going to fold this one up, this one up. Ideal world, it would have been nice to have had 2 more strips there to finish it, but I don't have enough pastry. Okay. And then what we're going to do with the leftover egg is just paste the top. This is glazing, and this will give the lattice work a really nice golden colour. And then we need to just trim this off, ready for the oven. So I'm going to hold the plate in one hand, and I'm going to have my knife in a vertical position in the other hand, and I'm just going to slice around. And then that just needs to go into a hot oven, 200 degrees, for about 20 minutes until the pastry is nicely cooked and golden. and that will be delicious served with either custard or, in this weather, ice cream.
Try that.